Science, exercise, nutrition, health, energy, passion. 1 year, no beer. This is the 1 year no beer podcast, where you will find all the latest tips, tricks, and hacks for a way to live better.
Welcome to the 1 year no beer podcast. I am Rory Fairbairns.
And I am Andy Ramage. That was a good entrance, Roo, for all the YouTube watchers. That was a good entrance.
Stage left.
Stage left.
Enter stage left. Special treats and surprises for those watching on YouTube. As always, check out youtube.com, 1 year no beer. Subscribe. So, thank you so much for all your queries from last week's podcast with Sean Stevenson. It was really great to get your feedback. We're just going to calculate all that stuff, bring it up and give you some good responses. Might even turn it into a blog post. So thank you so much. Again, if you've got any queries or feedback about any of this, email us, info@oneyearnobeer.com. Andy and I are usually there. Jen always responds. We're there. So, and a very interesting guest again this week. Andy, it's interesting that you've interviewed the people who are actually talking about integrating alcohol back into their lives when you're somebody who is emphatic, big word, that you won't ever go back.
Oh, good word. Yeah, do you know what? Because I'm really interested in the whole subject of alcohol. It's strange. The day I stopped drinking alcohol, I became fascinated with it. I spent all of my life talking about it, reading about it, learning about it. I know, I am immersed in this world of alcohol, yet I choose absolutely not to drink it. You're right. And it just raised a really interesting point, the podcast with Sharu, and that's why I almost wanted to get Rosamund on the podcast. We really need to make sure that for those people that decide they want to go back to drinking, they do it in the best possible controlled fashion. And that's not massive caveat that we're advocating that people do that. That's completely their own choice. As you know, my choice is that what's the point? I don't see it. But for lots of our members, they don't want to quit forever. They want to do 90 days or 365 days, transform their relationship and then go back. And it's so important that when they do go back, they go back with the right mindset. And that's what this podcast is actually really all about. And Rosamund's a great example of this. And mindful drinking, clues in the title, mindfulness, I think, and we talk about this a lot, is so important when you do go back to any form of drinking. In general, it's so important, but that awareness of your habits, that control that it gives you, that little gap between stimulus and response can make a massive difference. And that's essentially the underlying message of Rosamund's book. And someone that we've got to know really well, actually. We bumped into her on the BBC sofa with Naga and the crew.
Nice so plug.
Yeah, exactly. Nice plug. See what I did there. And I also bumped into her whilst recording the audio for the book. Strangely enough, she was in the booth next door recording the audio for her book. So, yeah, a great advocate of all things moderation, let's say. I know we don't really like that word, but we've got to have these conversations because I think it's really important for our members to be able to have the full spectrum.
I think this is where I've been very strongly, there are some people in the community who are like, I'm never touching alcohol again. There are no upsides, and they've got all evangelical about it. And this, really I have to be very strong with them and say, look, calm down. What works for you, great, well done, but it's not the reality of other people. Please don't preach, preaching that hard and fast, never drinking again. It's the devil. Alcohol is a sin. Look, we know of the downsides of alcohol, but then again, we know the downsides of cocaine. We know the downsides of eating meat or eating processed meat. That's the bad boy. We know the downsides of speeding, which is illegal, which most people will do sometimes in their life. We know the downsides of these things. Yet the reality is, the way human nature is that sometimes we're going to do them. And I think that is where I felt very strongly where I wanted to be. I did not want to be in a place where it was no, never, and I could never touch it again. I wanted to be in a place where I had freedom to choose, complete freedom to choose in any manner. And that is what we're talking about. And that's what 1 year no beer is about, freedom to choose. So not that it is controlling you, you've removed that, but you've got the freedom of choice. Yes, I might have a drink tonight. No, I don't think I will. And I'm going to go whichever way. And it doesn't start taking control. You don't go down some slippery scale. And the other thing I think I feel quite passionate about is when people say there's no benefits. And I'm thinking into the back of my head, I'm sorry, but you're actually wrong. Okay, so those benefits might be misguided, but the reality is alcohol does, it is a relaxant. It does relax. There are penalties to pay by having alcohol as your relaxant or relaxing after the end of the day. You're going to feel even worse and you're going to need to relax again. And that's whole cycle of needing alcohol to relax instead of finding a natural way to do it through yoga, meditation, and exercise and journaling and those things that will actually improve your life. So, to say there are no benefits is completely wrong. Unfortunately, there are, but it can be found in better ways too, and it can be found in more natural ways. It's all about choice. And at 1 Year No Beer, we want to be all about putting you in the driving seat so you're in control of your choices, whatever they may be.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's that transformation of your relationship. And to be really clear about it, and you touched on some great points there, you have that total full control. You don't use willpower around alcohol. For example, you pick and choose.
I'm not having one and then having to hold myself from having another one. It doesn't work like that.
Exactly. So, and that's the place where we want to get people to, if they do want to go back to drinking, or if they want to stay on their alcohol-free adventure like myself because they're having so much fun, then fantastic. We want to cater for everyone because all we're trying to do is get people to transform their relationship. That is the key point. And just before we dive into it, she also introduced me to something that's really important that I think we should discuss, and that's sober hair. Have you ever heard of such a thing before?
Sober hair? No.
Well, Rosamund talks a lot about vanity, which is really important, and actually something that we don't discuss that much. I think being two guys, we're probably less tuned into the vanity side of things, but I think it's prevalent for both men and women. But as part of that conversation, one of our one-to-ones, Kim, introduced me to the concept of sober hair. Apparently, if you don't drink, your hair is much more hydrated and voluptuous, and this is a really important thing, apparently.
Wow.
And I'd never heard it before.
There you go.
It comes up in conversation, and it's quite comical. So yeah, it's a good
sober hair.
Sober hair.
We need to put that on the website. Get your sober hair.
Yeah,
here.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was just going to challenge one thing you said just before, and that is, if you want to come and do 90 days and go back to your normal drinking, but you've chosen that you are doing 90 days every year because that's when you get clarity and you do a project and you really focus, that's perfectly acceptable. You're more than welcome to be a part of 1 Year No Beer. It's about challenging that. Not everyone wants to go back into total control. Again, it's all about choices. That is the key.
Perfect.
So let's hear from Rosamund.
Rosamund, welcome to the 1 Year No Beer podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I know, this is so cool, isn't it? Because I'm just thinking about it when we first met by pure fluke whilst recording our audiobooks.
Yes, exactly. In rooms next door to each other.
Totally random.
What were the chances?
2 books about alcohol, essentially, and the guy that was running it for Joseph said, there's a lady next door, you're not going to believe this, and she's doing a book about alcohol as well. I think you should meet at lunchtime. And it's really nice, wasn't it, to say hello and catch up. And then the next time we met, name dropping here, was on the BBC sofa with Naga and the crew. How cool was that?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yes, up in Salford on the BBC breakfast sofa. It was so exciting to be there.
Yeah, it's been a really an amazing couple of days, really. I think for both of us, obviously it's very topical being in Jan. This podcast will still be in Jan, I think, when this goes out, and your book, which I've read and thoroughly enjoyed, it's fantastic. Jives really well with our book, the 28-Day Alcohol-Free Challenge. I'll come back to that a bit later. But before we really dive into it, what inspired you to write the book?
I was inspired by the realisation that my whole life I'd always basically drunk too much. But if you'd have asked me if I thought that I drank too much, I would always have said no, because I kind of believed there were alcoholics at one end of the spectrum, and there were people who have a sort of healthy relationship with alcohol, and they just drink a little bit and drinking is not a problem for them. And I didn't really think there was anything in between. So I, like many people, I thought, well, I'm not lying in a ditch, so I'm obviously fine. I haven't got any kind of problem. And it was really, as I sort of got a bit older, as I hit my 30s, had a couple of kids, just feeling more tired in general, and just the realization that, you know, I was feeling exhausted, I was feeling anxious all the time, I was kind of getting a bit fat, like my skin wasn't as good as it used to be. There were just so many things that part of me was like, oh, this is just getting older, this is just what happens. But another part of me knew that if I drank less, it would make a big difference to all of those things. So I kept trying to cut down, and I tried loads of different things. I thought, you know, I'll only drink certain drinks, or I'll only, you know, I tried to set myself different rules. I'll only drink at weekends, and then I'll kind of break the rule and then think, oh, I obviously can't do it. Alcohol is one, you know, it's got the power over me. I can't have failed, so I can't do it, and kind of give up. It was a bit, I suppose you could compare it maybe to like yo-yo dieting or something like that, where I would kind of try and cut down and fail, and then just, you know, be like, well, I obviously can't drink moderately, so what's the point in even trying? So really, I wrote the book because I wanted to learn how. When I started writing the book, I have to admit I still drank too much, and at my first meeting with my editor, I was actually getting so animated while talking about it that I knocked my glass of rosé across the table, and the glass smashed and it sort of went all over her. Amazingly, she still asked me to do the book.
On alcohol, mindful drinking, there, right there, smashing a glass all over your editor. What a start!
Exactly. So it was really the process of writing the book that kind of taught me how to be a moderate drinker.
Yeah, because that's actually what I was going to ask as well. You know, how has your relationship changed, you know, over the period of writing the book?
Yeah, quite dramatically, to be honest. Because I knew that I didn't want to stop drinking altogether. Basically, my problem area is that I go to lots of work events, and at these work events there's always drinks, and you just sort of knock it back because it's there, and also, you know, to take the edge off because you're talking to lots of people you don't know and that kind of thing. And it's not even very nice. It's always kind of, you know, cheap, warm white wine. It's not really a drink that you even enjoy drinking. And so it was that kind of habitual thing. Also opening a bottle of wine once the kids are in bed, just purely out of habit rather than because I actually enjoy it. That type, I was happy to keep the occasional glass of fizz with a friend to celebrate her promotion, or, you know, a really nice glass of wine over dinner with my husband, or those occasional drinks I wanted to keep in my life. But I just wanted to get rid of the vast majority of my drinking behaviour, which was drinking that I wasn't enjoying. I was just doing it mindlessly without even thinking about it, and obviously it wasn't doing me any good at all. So that was what I wanted to cut down. And I kind of, now my relationship with alcohol is a bit like my relationship with sugar or cake. As a general rule, try not to have it, because I know it's bad for me. But, you know, if it's your birthday and you offer me a slice of cake, then I'm gonna have a slice of cake and I'm gonna enjoy it. So that's how I try and be now.
And I think that's wonderful. And this is fascinating for me because, one, our stories are really similar. You know, backstories, both professional people, and, you know, all the social pressure that comes with that, and the nights out, and writing a book whilst, you know, living another life is always super interesting. But this particular subject's fascinating to me because I don't drink anymore. You know, it's been 4 years. I choose not to. An empowered choice. Didn't do anything for me. I went through the same process as you and actually reached the point and went, do you know what? I'm not even going to bother trying to do the moderation thing because I don't enjoy it. It doesn't offer me anything. You know, I can still do all the social and all those things. That being said, a huge percentage of people that enter our challenges at 1 Year No Beer, whether it's 28 days, 90 or 365, they want to drink at the end. They want to reset, they want to take stock, and they want to come back a changed drinker, you know, a transformed drinker, and achieve what you've achieved, and Rory, the co-founder, has achieved. This sort of controlled drinking where actually they can genuinely take it or leave it. Or on a special occasion, like a bit of cake, every now and again, have a little bit. Maybe they slightly overindulge, but it doesn't come with all those ramifications, all that mindless drinking of the tiredness and the lethargy and the problems and the weight and all those negatives. And I think it's really important at the moment. I'm having some wonderful conversations. I had a great conversation with a lady called Sharu who's also on the podcast, about this almost booze optimization, about people taking this new approach, because I think there needs to be a change in mindset. You need an alcohol-free mindset, and I think you also then need an alcohol mindset. And that's what I love about the book. It's actually giving people those ideas and those tips to go back to drinking, but in a mindful way, rather than letting those old habits creep in. And there's real structure around that. So I think it's a fascinating subject for me at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the kind of tips and advice and the sort of tools that you need to learn how to drink moderately are almost exactly the same as the tools you need to not drink, because I think drinking moderately is very much about alcohol-free days, so it's kind of getting through those as well. And also, once a person starts to change their relationship with drinking, I feel like, I mean, it's like again, you can compare it to cake, which is, I feel like the less of it you have, the less of it you need. If you get in the habit of having a cake every afternoon at 4 o'clock, then you're going to get to 4 o'clock and be like, where's my cake? But if you once you break that habit and make an effort not to get back into it, then you can have the occasional bit of cake without it becoming a recurring thing. And I feel like with drinking, because the less of it you have, the less of it you need, and also your tolerance drops down as well, and you become more capable of doing sober socializing and learning to relax without drinking, and all those different parts of your life where you may have relied on drinking. Once you can realize that you don't need drinking for those things, then you can either moderate your drinking, or some people might have the aim of moderating their drinking, and once they get to that stage, they realize they just don't need it in their life anymore, and they might just go completely alcohol free.
That is perfect, and that's exactly what I'm saying. I think for a lot of people come to this with the aim of moderation, and then hopefully by doing the work on the whys and actually demonstrating to themselves that they can operate socially, for example, they can still relax at home without alcohol, by dispelling all those myths and all those reasons maybe they turn to alcohol in the first place, that even if their aim is this moderation, this mindful drinking, that eventually, a bit like me, they'll just go, do you know what? What's the point? And I think that's a really nice transition and a path, because it's a really empowered transition, rather than this, I can't do this anymore because I've been really naughty and I've overindulged and that's it, I can never do this anymore. It's actually going back to it and realising, do you know what? It doesn't really offer me that much anymore. I think I'll just stop. And I think that's... Yeah. And that's why I really like these conversations, because I think we need to have them, these grown-up conversations around alcohol, because people are scared to admit, for one, it's not all about the taste. And let's be honest, the alcohol-free versions are getting so good now. I think that the taste argument is almost debunked by the fact that they're just as good. I think it's about that squiffy little bit of intoxication that people do like. And I think we have to be a grown-up and admit that people do like that at times. And if they want that in their lives, how do they achieve that without opening the floodgates to all the problems that we know about so well?
And I think it's about knowledge as well, because the more you learn about drinking, because obviously I did a lot of research for the book, and there's quite a lot of science about drinking, and that sort of buzz that you get when you first have, particularly a fizzy alcoholic drink, like a gin and tonic or a glass of champagne or something, that sort of initial buzz you get wears off so quickly that really, if you have any more than one drink, it's like downhill anyway. And once you realise that, then it really, really helps. It really, really helps you drink moderately, because you don't, because you have that information in your mind. You're not thinking to yourself, oh, another glass of fizz and I'll feel even better, because you know that you won't.
Yeah, and actually, when I was talking about this with Cheryl on the podcast, she was talking about a cost-benefit analysis almost of alcohol, and I thought it was really interesting. It was like, drink one, what happens? Drink two, drink three, and it was sort of around that drink three, you start to lose so many of the benefits, and then all the negatives start to build up. And obviously, as you hit 4, 5, and 6, it all, it's really heavily outweighed by the negatives. So it's about maybe staying in that zone. And again, to sort of loop back to it, I think it reaches that point of, well, if it's just going to be the one anyway, what's the real point? And then maybe again there's this drift to going alcohol free, but in such an empowered way. I think that makes a big difference. And just sort of looping around a bit, something that I really picked up on in this book as well, which I thought was interesting, is women's relationship with alcohol, which has just changed dramatically. It feels like in the last 20 years. I mean, you know, men have always been historically big drinkers, but the women have come from nowhere, you know, and it's well researched, the book, and I picked up on some of the research suggesting that for the first time in history, women are drinking as much as men, if not more. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a cultural thing. I'm in my mid-30s now, so I grew up, when I was a teenager, it was the 90s, so it was very much the era of the ladettes and the, you know, all the people that I admired. Yeah, it was Kate Moss with her glass of fizz, and I don't know, Zoe Ball with her bottle of Jack Daniels. It seemed like all the kind of cool women in the public eye were basically drunk all the time. And if you look at, you know, television, it was Sex and the City with their cocktails and, you know, Absolutely Fabulous, Bridget Jones, the books and the film. Like, almost everything that was aimed at women was so much about drinking. I used to watch Sex and the City, and I really remember it being sponsored by Baileys, and every time it came on, me and my flatmates were always like, "Oh, Baileys!
Oh, I love a Baileys,
isn't it?" Yeah. Now I think, "Oh my God, Baileys! What were we thinking?" But yeah, it was very much. It was very, very kind of heavily. I was about to say marketed at women, but it wasn't even marketing. It was just sort of ingrained in the cultural fabric of everything that we were doing. And I think that's a big part of why my generation is probably the heaviest drinking generation. Because if I talk to my mum, for instance, she and her friends, you know, that baby boomer generation, they all drink quite a lot now that they're older. But when they were younger, a bottle of wine was a treat. They didn't just have wine with their Tuesday night dinner at home like my generation tends to. And it was a sort of occasional thing, whereas this kind of daily drinking is something that I think is quite unique to my generation, because the younger generations, well, according to research, I know obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but you know, the millennials and Generation Y, is that the one below millennials?
Yeah.
They're drinking less than ever. Loads of them are teetotal, and it's just.
I think it's so true, and even I think as men as well, I think it's this band, we're caught in that sort of 35, 45, 50 sort of age of this unbelievably heavy drinkers that I think the younger people are not associating with as much. Again, there's always exceptions, but they're definitely not. They're more body conscious, they're more conscious about how they look in public, and I think maybe social media and stuff has added to that. And then again, the older generation sort of, they didn't drink like us. One, they couldn't afford it. Two, the you know, the alcohol, especially beer for men, just wasn't anywhere near as strong or available. And as you mentioned, culturally, women weren't drinking that much at home. So I think that's why we've got this huge band of problem binge drinkers almost at the moment, and why there's so many people reaching that mid-30s, 40s young family and going, this is not right. This is not the way I should be behaving. But then
at the same time, I think particularly for women, there's so much around being a parent that's kind of associated with drinking.
Oh, completely.
You know, there's so many products that are branded, you know, mummy juice, and you know, mum's time is her time when she opens the wine, and all that kind of stuff. Gin and tonic. It's a big deal for parenting stuff.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned actually in the book about, you know, the reason maybe women are drinking at home, you know, even though they're raising their family, it's not because they're not, you know, loving raising their family, but maybe they're restricted in lots of ways socially. And I think you mentioned solo parties as one of the things that I remember sticking out. And I totally get that, and I totally understand that. You know, it's that almost release, but I think it's because it's become so culturally acceptable, it's just become easy to the quick fix release, which is open a bottle of alcohol, whereas meditating or going for a run or all these things might not even be possible if you're looking after the kids. So I think it makes it a lot more difficult, I think, for women. I can totally understand how this thing's bubbled up, but at the same time, that's why I think you're doing a great job, and we're doing a great job of actually just shaking people out of this a little bit and going, hold on a minute, just have a think about what's really going on. Is this good for you? You know, can you actually achieve what you want to achieve without alcohol, without that quick fix of opening a bottle of wine? Because I think one of the stats was that 8 out of 10 bottles of wine that are bought by women now.
Yes, yeah,
I mean, it's
exactly.
it's
So
just,
yeah, women can drink an extraordinary amount now, as you say, equal to men. And I think once you kind of decide that once you've realised the role of alcohol in your life should ideally change for you to be healthier, then it's about kind of acknowledging all the blocks that might be in your way to achieving that, because the big one of those, I think, is your social life and the people around you. Because I definitely found when I was pregnant the first time with my son, and obviously wasn't really drinking because I was pregnant, and I found it really easy and also I have to say, quite a release. I was like, oh, it's so nice to not feel the pressure to drink.
yeah.
And I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to carry this on. After this baby is born, I'm just going to carry on not drinking, and I'm going to be so healthy, and I'm going to like ping back to being thin really easily, and I'm going to have so much more energy, and just save so much money. It's going to be amazing. I had like all these high-minded ideas of how easy it would be to just carry on not drinking after having a baby, and then obviously you have a baby, and people turn up at your house with champagne constantly, and then when I have dinner with my husband, he's like, "Oh, you're not pregnant, so we can have wine." And then you go out with friends, and you want to sort of prove to them that you haven't become dull because now you're a parent. So you try and, drinking was like a way to prove that you're not boring. And every single part of my life, from going to work events, going from hanging out with the mum friends from NCT, we would always have wine at those things. It seemed like every single social element of my life completely revolved around booze, and I just fell back into it so easily and so quickly. And I really felt disappointed with myself, because I had been so determined to carry on, if not drinking at all, then at least drinking very moderately after having a baby. And I couldn't believe how easy and how quickly I fell back into drinking too much. And I think that's when I realised that you really have to have a plan. You can't just decide to do it and do it. You have to think it through properly.
Oh, exactly. And that's so true. And that's what we say all the time. I think, the misunderstanding from so many people is that they're these willpower superheroes and they can just flick this switch on and off, and they can't. And what happens, I think, to a lot of people when they take that approach, they slip up really quickly, or like yourself, they fall back into it, and then they start to doubt themselves a little bit and think, hold on, why can't I switch this thing on and off? Maybe I've got faulty genes, or I've got this problem. Actually, they just don't understand that they've been socially and psychologically conditioned and pressured into doing this thing. And a lot of it is social pressure. Isn't it interesting? Whilst you're pregnant, zero social pressure. No one's going to be twisting your arm to drink.
It's so easy to not drink.
Yeah.
Ask any pregnant woman, it's easy because no one's trying to make you drink.
Yeah, exactly. I think we worked out, like in our close circle of friends as well, we worked out every single one of them was pregnant before they wanted to announce that they were pregnant, because they turned up and didn't drink. It's like, it just stands out. Why is she not drinking? She must be pregnant. It's insane, the pressure that we put on ourselves to do this thing that actually is not very good for us, unless, we drink mindfully or, very moderately. It's going to be doing us damage. It's just crazy. And actually that leads me to another question, which I liked, was the reference to Gretchen Rubin, who's been on our podcast, actually, and she's fantastic, actually. I love Gretchen. And she was talking about identity. And I think that's so important, and you picked up on this, and I loved it in the book, because that is such a big thing. And you mentioned it about meeting the mums again, and you almost had to prove that you weren't dull anymore, and you still had it, you could still cut it with the kids. And by doing that, it's about drinking alcohol. Whereas when you take that away, it's a real threat to your personality. I remember my own. I used alcohol as this extroversion booze cloak. I was literally like Superman. I'd run into the bar, have a couple of pints, and then transform into this flamboyant sort of extrovert. And then the next day, I'd be like Clark Kent, all introverted and shy, and didn't really, I wanted to go home and read my books. So then I knew as soon as I stopped drinking, I was going to potentially lose this big part of my personality. And for me, that was the biggest fear. I think of all the fears, it was like that, and how on earth was I going to dance at weddings? That was my number one fear. But aside from that, it was, I'm going to lose this part of me, this fun time Andy, this first in last out the bar type guy. He's going to go. What's left? And I noticed you picked up on that in the book.
Yeah, and I think a really interesting thing about that is that people feel like if they don't drink, they're not going to be fun, or then they're going to be perceived as boring. When, of course, as a person who doesn't drink, I'm sure you know that hanging out with drunk people makes you realise they're really not as fun as they think
It's an
they are.
absolute shocker.
And it does. The thing is, it seems so obvious. Of course, it's true. You don't need alcohol to be a fun, interesting person. And of course, you're more interesting without alcohol because you've got your wits about you more. But it's not that alcohol gives you confidence, but it just dampens your inhibitions to the extent that you're less aware of what you're doing. So you sort of care less about how you're perceived. And the only way you can really learn to do that sober is with practice, because it's so when I first decided to go out to social events and not drink, I sort of had the realization that I've kind of never done, apart from being pregnant, never done that before. Every social, from being, my late teens, obviously all through university and my early career, always been drunk at social events. So going to a social event without that crutch of drinking is initially nerve-wracking, but the only way to get more confident in those situations is to do it and to keep doing it, and then you get more confident over time, which is something that pays dividends long term.
Yeah, and that is so important.
People talk about Dr. Courage, and it doesn't give you courage, it stops you building courage.
Exactly, and we did a speaker series just in the week at the Royal Exchange, and lots of members from One You Know Beer, lots of people that have booked the 28-day alcohol-free challenge. They came along, and it was really courageous of a lot of them, because it was the classic social trigger. It probably ticked every box. You probably wasn't going to know anyone there. Some of the people that came along were on their own. There was obviously going to be no alcohol, and even for us, we were making speeches. That's when I normally would be down in a few beers just to sort of get prepared. And it was fantastic to see all those people come along, because it was a brilliant training ground to be social. We drank Seedlip all night. We had a right laugh. We made our speeches, and the chat just flowed and flowed and flowed. And I thought, what a powerful experience for those people, because now they've just demonstrated to themselves on a first-hand basis that they can go and do this thing socially in the biggest box ticked type of trigger event, and they nailed it and had a great time. And there's so much power in that. That again, as you suggested, I think that's the sort of stuff that transforms people's relationship with alcohol, because they know, right, actually, I don't need this thing for this social glue. I can actually do it without it. And then you're coming from a position of strength rather than weakness, which I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you've done it, then you know you can do it, and then you're more confident the next time, and then it just gets easier and easier until it's totally normal. And I feel that it's just so empowering to not need to have an alcoholic drink in your hand to have fun. Because I think when I think it was Laura Willoughby of Club Soda who said to me, it's not compulsory to drink in the pub. But it was kind of a game-changing moment, because I was like, I suppose obviously, of course it's not, but I always thought it was. So I would say when you go to if you go to the pub with friends, or if you go to a dinner party, or you go to a kind of a social occasion at which you would normally drink, and you're going to try and not drink, then I just think, really just bring your A game and just come being your brilliant, funny, normal self, and don't try and be like, oh, I'm not drinking, oh, this is so boring, oh, I'm just going to hide in the corner, being awkward about it. You've got to kind of put yourself out there, because it's only by doing that you kind of learn to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. It's bring your A game, isn't it? It's almost fake it until you make it. We say that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, throw yourself into it. Don't go in with that thought of, oh, exactly that, I'm not drinking, I'm going to be boring. Give it some and see what happens, and you might surprise yourself. And I think people underestimate that there's always a bit of social anxiety. That's how we're meant to feel. Yeah. Everyone feels it. It's just that we've all bulldozed it for years with alcohol. It's perfectly natural to feel a little bit uncomfortable in social settings.
Yeah.
I think we always will. But that's just your body preparing you for action. And actually, you can look at it two ways as anxiety. I think you touched on this actually in the book about people with anxiety, reframing it in such a way that it's just excitement. or it's your body preparing, rather than this thing of, oh my God, I need to run, I can't handle this, I need to have a drink to settle it down. And another thing that I really picked up on in the book, which I enjoyed, which was something that we haven't focused as much on, I think probably coming from the sort of the male angle, was vanity as a big motivator for men and women. That is,
men can be just as vain.
Exactly, that's what I mean. I think it's men and women. I think, and probably surprisingly, a lot of men, this is a big motivator. They just wouldn't admit it.
Yeah. Whereas women are more happy to say, I'm drinking less because I want to lose weight. Or
hair or skin. And I know you mentioned things like your skin getting better.
Yeah, it's incredible the effect that alcohol has on your skin, because obviously there's a lot of sugar in alcohol as well, and sugar is bad for your skin. But it literally sort of eats the collagen, which is the thing that makes your skin sort of plump and elastic and kind of youthful looking. So you're literally kind of sapping your skin of its youthful glow by drinking, which is obviously awful. When you think of it like that, it really puts you off your G&T.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised. And I stumbled across this. We do a lot of one-to-one work, and one of the ladies that I do some work with, a lady called Kim, just the other day told me something I'd never heard of before, and it just cracked me up, and that was sober hair. So it's this whole thing about, obviously it's more hydrated and it's more voluptuous and bouncy, and it's sober hair. And I thought, isn't that brilliant?
Yeah, because alcohol is incredibly dehydrating, which obviously is terrible for your skin and your hair. It just makes everything sort of dry and brittle.
But what actually...
Sober hair is gorgeous and glossy.
Gorgeous and glossy, but what's drunk hair? That's what I was like. Is it just like really annoying, and it just, you can't brush it in the right way because it can't be arsed, and it just sort of sits on your head and mopes about and is all over emotional.
Right. And obviously you only know this if you've got quite long hair, but dry hair breaks very easily, and then it goes, it looks broken, so it sort of always looks a bit messy. It just never looks smooth and shiny. Yeah,
well, I think, these advantages are really important for people, because I think people come to this alcohol-free challenge for so many different reasons, and I always like to pick out the advantages, and vanity's something that we haven't focused on as much, but I think it's equally as important as all the others, time and energy and motivation, all those things, because people like to look nice.
And the health issues, obviously every area of your health is going to be improved by not drinking, because it doesn't offer any health benefits whatsoever. And I think it's incredible how many studies there are with the connection between alcohol and cancer, particularly breast cancer. I read that there have been over 100 studies over 10 years directly relating drinking alcohol with breast cancer, and these studies have kind of intentionally been sort of hidden and excused by alcohol companies because women are such big consumers of alcohol. They really try and keep that on the DL. But the thing is, when you talk to somebody about cancer risk, it doesn't really feel real. I think people sort of think, if you read the papers, everything gives you cancer. You can't spend your life worrying about what gives you cancer. Whereas if you say this is going to give you bad skin, then it feels like it's crazy, because obviously having cancer is worse than having bad skin. But it just feels more immediate. Appealing to people's vanity is a very universal leveler.
Yeah, exactly. And just even to expand on that cancer subject, and we don't really go into this as much because it always looks a little bit preachy, but just while we're on the subject, there's another interesting stat that only about 50% of the British public even know there's a link between cancer, like a real link. This is not just a tenuous one. There's a real link between alcohol and cancer, and only 25% of the population realise there's a link between breast cancer and alcohol. So these things are always good to vocalise, because if you weren't aware of that, maybe you should be, because it is really important. And as you said, there's so many studies coming out now showing these real links that I think it's important that people are aware.
I think it is important to talk about it, but you're right, it can feel preachy. And I think the thing, if you've made the decision to not drink or to drink less, or you've made any kind of decision about your lifestyle to make it healthier, so you decided to take up an exercise, or you decided to, I don't know, not eat sugar, or whatever it is, you just really have to be careful about being preachy people are so keen to dismiss those views as kind of smug and sanctimonious, and they roll their eyes a bit. So I think it's important to sort of focus on benefits, but in a way that's a bit like, just try and do so without being preachy.
Yeah, and I think the best thing you can ever do is just be happy, healthy, either alcohol-free or happy and healthy mindful drinking, because that has such an impact and an influence on the people around you. It's huge. I know, from my own example, not that it's necessarily stopped people drinking around me, but they drink a lot less. They're a lot more conscious of what they consume, and we see it all the time. And actually I find a lot of people will come to our challenge because indirectly they're trying to help someone else.
Yeah.
And you'll see that bubble up. Not that they almost admit it, but they might be trying to help a partner or a husband or a brother or a friend. So they're like, I'm on this challenge in the hope that their example will influence them. And we know that it does. There's tons of science behind the fact that, you do influence those around you, probably free people out. So I think that's the best thing, exactly, rather than the preaching. Although at times it's good to let people know that there are these clear links. I think the best thing you can do is just be happy and healthy and you, and that's super powerful.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Because if you tell somebody to do something, they might feel resistant to that. Whereas if they see you kind of having more energy and being happier and being less anxious and sleeping better and losing weight and just everything in your life being better, then obviously that's a much better example to set to them.
Oh, exactly. You should see my before and after photos at the moment. They are shocking and good at the same time, but they even shocked me. Believe me, I can't believe I used to look like that. But so if we've got a challenge member, they've done 28 days, they've done 90 days, 365 days, and they're thinking of coming back to drinking, what's the sort of structure? What tips and advice would you give them?
I think one of the most important things is to have a rule or a set of rules that you decided on that work for you, that are kind of set in stone so you don't break them. So I go by the rule of 3, which means I only drink on 3 days of the week.
Okay.
This is my maximum. So, I might have a week where I don't drink at all, but maximum I would drink on 3 days of the week, and I would have no more than 3 drinks on the days that I do drink. So even if I'm going to a particularly boozy all-day thing, like a wedding, for instance, I would really pace myself and only have 3 drinks on that day. So I think rules are really important. I think the other really important thing is not to beat yourself up if you break the rule, because I feel like people often set themselves a rule and then fall off the wagon and then think, well, I can't do it, so what's the point in trying? But instead, you've got to look at what happened, look at the situation in which you drank too much when you didn't intend to, and then you can see really, really clearly what your triggers are, and then you can plan for a way to deal with that in the future. So if you just see it as something to learn from, almost see it as a positive thing, because people are so hard on themselves, and it's so unnecessary. Because if instead they said, if they woke up and thought, God, I got drunk last night and I didn't mean to, I'm a terrible person, I've really failed at moderate drinking, it's awful. But instead, if they woke up and thought, God, I really learned about myself last night, I really learned that situation, that set of people, the way I was feeling yesterday, my sort of lack of a proper plan, my going into that bar and not knowing what I was going to order until I sort of had to decide on the spur of the moment, all of those things I can definitely do better in the future. So I've learned something which is brilliant. So I think if you try and see slip-ups as a positive thing, then that really helps for the future. And planning is really, really, really key. I think you always need to know in advance what you're going to order if you're going to a bar or into a social situation, because it's just too easy to be put on the spot and just agree to, whatever everyone else is having. And another tip that I think is really good is monitoring, because there's loads of science about how monitoring your drinking, about how monitoring your habits in general helps make them better. So if you're completely alcohol-free, then you can sort of tick off alcohol-free days. But if you are drinking every now and then there are loads of apps and things you can use. I use the Drink Aware one. And even now, I'm a kind of very moderate drinker. I drink very little now. Still use the app every day. And I find it really satisfying to kind of mark off another alcohol-free day, or over Christmas maybe I had a few too many of my 3-drink days, and I can look back at that and think, God, I drank a lot then. This month, look how much less I'm drinking. Just the act of monitoring it just really makes you aware of what you're drinking and how much. And I think that alone helps make you be better at it.
Yeah, I think there's some brilliant tips in there. And I love the one about compassion rather than the stick of guilt. That's so important. And we talk about that a lot. It's that if you slip up, learn from your mistakes, come back stronger. Again, there's lots of science behind that, and I read some recently, and this is about people that were almost dependent drinkers, but those who were most ashamed of their relapses were the quickest to relapse going forward, because it pushes people away, and they're embarrassed and they're ashamed, and actually they beat themselves up by doing the very thing that caused the problem in the first place, rather than those that are actually willing to learn and grow and take on board, their emotions, as you mentioned, take on board their situation, can actually plan for the future and make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because those feelings that can be brought up by drinking when you didn't intend to, like guilt or shame or failure or regret, those feelings are kind of classic triggers for wanting to drink. But any negative emotion is really a trigger for wanting to drink, because alcohol does numb your emotions. So if you're feeling bad, then you might feel that you can numb it with alcohol, but obviously it also stops you feeling good, because you can't selectively numb emotions. You can just sort of numb yourself completely. So I think this is a really key thing as well. Once you drink less or drink nothing, then you really have to feel your feelings. And I think that can be difficult for some people initially, but it's in the being aware of how you feel about things and learning to really feel your feelings that you can really, really learn about yourself, and you can learn what's important to you. You just make better decisions. It makes your life so much better in so many ways.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant observation, actually, that of dealing with those emotions. And I think that's where we look at mindfulness and all these other things actually come into play. And I guess we haven't really picked up on that yet, the underlying idea of mindful drinking. And I know you expand on mindfulness, the practice, as a great way to bring awareness to your drinking first and foremost, but also to buy that gap, which I always talk about, between stimulus and response, to deal with cravings. And I think that's a really important part, and a message that flows through the book, which I really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, I think that gap is really important, because it's in those moments when you can make a better decision. And again, that's all about preparation. So if your standard response is to come home after a stressful day of work and open a beer, then if you can plan other things that are, alternative stress relievers, then, so it could be going for a run, or it could be just like lying on your sofa watching a box set, or it could be having a bath, or some people are into yoga and meditation. Some people hate the idea of that and they would rather read like a celebrity gossip magazine. Whatever it is that works for you, you need to work out what is actually a proper stress reliever for you and do that. But if you have those things at your fingertips, then you won't just fall back on your learned habit.
Perfect. And then what about the 12-week evaluation? I think you mentioned in the book. Explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's very important to kind of check in with yourself and see how it's going. Because I do the app, I can quite easily look back at my drinking and see how it's been. I can look back over sort of 3 months and sort of go, well, that was my birthday and that was Christmas, and maybe those times weren't ideal, but overall I've done pretty well. Or if you have that reminder to check in at that time, then you might realise, actually, I haven't been monitoring how much I'm drinking, and maybe last week, I can't remember, was it 3 days I drank on? Maybe it was 4, and I definitely had more than 3 drinks on one of the days, and it's just a good idea to kind of reset your intention of what your plan is.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and something that everyone should build into their plan, as it were, if you're going back to drinking in any shape or form, is to evaluate. 12 weeks, If you've got an app like the Drinkaware app, that's fantastic because it's in black and white, isn't it? All the drinks that you've had. But, reflect on where you are, why you're drinking, go back over all your whys, all your reasons, and just keep a real close eye on the fact that old habits are not starting to slip in. Or hopefully you're seeing progression, and maybe, again, it's that positive progression towards drinking less and less and less to the point that it might just fizzle out, which I think is also a fantastic, empowering place to be.
Yeah. And I keep mentioning the app, but you don't need any kind of special thing to keep track of your drinking at all. And in fact, I interviewed an expert from UCL's Department of Behaviour Change Science, or I don't think that's the proper name of the department, but it's basically they study behaviour change. And they did this big study where people monitored their drinking, and one group of people kept a very basic diary of what they drank, and the other group of people had lots of bells and whistles, and they filled in forms, and they got graphs and charts and lots of information about exactly how much they drank. And he said in both groups their level of alcohol intake dropped a lot, but there was no difference between the two groups. So he said what we learned from that it doesn't matter how kind of primitive your method of keeping track of your drinking is, just the simple act of monitoring it is the important thing. So you could just have a note in your phone and write it in there, or in a notebook, or whatever the easiest thing is. You don't need to do any kind of fancy thing.
Yeah, stack the pint glasses on top of each other and bring them home, as we probably used to do when we were overdoing it. And then one thing, just almost to round up now, there was a bit right towards the end that I saw, and it was that this idea of 4,000 weeks. And I've never done the maths around that before, but that scared the life out of me. I was like, 4,000, is that it? I mean, it's 4,000 weeks. That's an average lifespan.
Yeah, but that came from Andy Cope.
Yeah, that's right. He's a positive psychologist.
Yeah, he's a positive psychology expert, and he does these kind of workshops and groups around positive psychology. And he said that's a really, really powerful thing if you say to people, 4,000 weeks is all you've got. He said if you say that to a kid, they're like, wow, that's amazing, 4,000 weeks. They find it really interesting. And if you say it to an adult, you can see them all thinking, shit, that's really, really not very long.
I mean, that jumped out of the page at me, and I thought, and I'm someone now who doesn't drink for that one reason. Life is too short for hangovers. And that type of stat just drilled it home to me. Oh my God, why would I want to write off 52 days or 100 odd days a year and however many weeks to hangovers? It's just, life is too short, I'm afraid.
That's exactly the thing, because alcohol is such a time thief, because when you drink you don't remember your evening as well as you would have. You don't sleep very well, and you're tired the next day, and you're hungover, and you can't enjoy the next day as well. I think time is the most precious thing. That I think most people would agree that time is the most precious thing there is. And to use something that actively steals your time just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and the reverse of that, I think, is to actively do something that gives you all that time back.
Yes.
It's such a positive step, because most of us are having our time stolen, without even thinking about it. So by going alcohol-free or mindful drinking, you get that time back. Lives have changed. My life definitely changed because of the time. I had the time to train, I had the time to study, I had the time to write books, as you've done around your super busy career. And that's just another massive reason to take a break. And then just to summarise, where can we hear more about you, get to know more about you, the book?
Well, the book is available now. So, Mindful Drinking: How Cutting Down Can Change Your Life. Available from all good bookshops and Amazon.
Excellent.
And so I'm back at my day job now. So working hard at that. I'm a journalist. So that's what I'm doing every day.
Perfect. And are you on Twitter or any of those things if people wanted to reach out?
I am on Twitter at Rosamund Dean. Yes, come and say hi.
At Rosamund Dean. Perfect. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed the book. It's been so nice talking to you. And thank you for coming on our little podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that was so insightful from Rosamund.
Yeah, I mean, she's a lovely lady, and it was just a nice conversation, and clearly someone who's thinking deeply about the subject of mindful drinking and about going back into a mindset where you do drink on occasions. And if you are going to drink on occasions, doing it in such a way that it doesn't have those huge negative consequences on your life and your relationship and your motivation and all those type of things. Again, my choice is to stick on this alcohol-free adventure, but we've got lots of people that want to look at this from a slightly different angle. So it's really important we have these conversations so that people are armed with choice, I think is the key word.
Armed with choice. And you know what you can choose to do right now? Head to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit in 1 Year No Beer, hit subscribe. Special stuff like me walking in from different angles, Andy's glorious pink top. If Helen saw you now.
I know. If only she could see me now. What I think you need to do as well, you know that clever walking trick where it looks like you're walking downstairs? That's a great YouTube moment. How
about upstairs?
Oh, look, it's just genius. You have to subscribe just for that.
Just for that. As always, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share, and we'd love a review. But, you know, we can't ask too many things of you amazing people. Hopefully this content has been enjoyable. Hopefully it's insightful. As always, your feedback, info@oneyearnobeer.com. See you next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the 1 Year No Beer podcast. For a full list of episodes and to join in the challenge yourself, head on over to oneyearnobeer.com. oneyearnobeer.com.